When I saw the news that Richard and Matt and the Muse team had raised $300 million at a 2.5 valuation, I had to get my friend Richard on the podcast. That is the largest raise in hotel tech history. I thought it'd be interesting to hear directly from Richard on the direction that Muse is taking. So with that, let's get into it. Well, welcome back to another episode of Not Done. I'm Sloan Dean, and today I've got founder of Muse, Richard Valtr, on. Richard grew up a son of a programmer and developer from the Czech Republic, and I believe you were studying...
A hotelier.
And
so it's
a
like the
hotelier.
two things.
Hey, you were made for this. And my
Like I didn't know, but
you were born to be the Muse founder, but you were a hotelier and you were frustrated with the lack of PMS solutions. And so you founded Muse in 2012. Fast forward to today, you just announced in January a $300 million raise at a $2.5 billion valuation. I'm sure if you rewind the tape back to 2012, that's how you saw it playing out, right?
I actually did. I'm an idiot. Like I really thought that it was like that. I just thought that it would be like by 2016, I didn't think that it would take this long. I was just like, this is obvious. The industry needs this. I'm obviously the right person to solve this, from Czech Republic, of course we're going to just do everything, steamroll everyone.
Well, congratulations on the success today. Your valuation in March of 2024 was stated at 1.2 billion. Now you're at 2.5. That's a big jump. What transpired over these last couple of years that made you have that kind of leapfrog growth, if you will?
I think it's just growth. I think it's just like our continued success. And I think that's really, I think, the main thing. I started the company in 2012, and apparently it takes 14 years to become an overnight success. But I think in this industry, everything moves very, very slowly. I think that it is quite a conservative industry. I think that people, they don't think technology first in terms of how do we solve some of the most pressing and fundamental issues in hospitality. And I think that that's changing, but that is the kind of the status quo of this industry. And I think people also have this kind of strange perspective on how the technology industry has kind of treated them. So I think that they come with a lot of healthy skepticism, a lot of demands, because basically there's been a lot of features that have been built up over the last 20 or 30 years. But I think that once you gain the trust of at least a certain segment or a certain amount of territory in the world, it then actually kind of seems to lead to this kind of hyper growth that I think we've been experiencing, at least in the last kind of 5 or 6 years.
I'm always curious when I have founders like you on, if you reflect back on the last 14 years or so, what would you do differently? I always ask that of founders. Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently?
I think, again, I'm a first-time founder, so all of this is new. I think that there's other people that have been at this kind of 2 or 3 times that I think that there you can actually kind of say, okay, I know exactly because I made this mistake, and then the next time I was able to, do it differently. For myself, I wouldn't have done anything differently because I kind of grew up through the process. I started Muse when I was I started thinking about it when I was 27. I actually kind of formally founded it when I was 29. I'm now 42. It's all a process. I still feel energized by the whole thing. I still feel energized by the mission, by the types of people that I now get to work with. It's all incredibly exciting. And I think that I think is the main thing. And I feel that maybe if I had it more figured out, and if I hadn't made as many mistakes as I have made, maybe I wouldn't be as excited about everything. So I feel like it's a nice journey. It's a good journey. It's probably not the way that I think some of the kind of newer I always look at some of the kind of the newer entrepreneurs entering, for example, our space and things like that, and they get very frustrated at the pace of change, and they get very annoyed that the industry just isn't listening to them or isn't, grasping onto some of those things. And I do feel that if you compare it to other forms of technology, that's a bad thing. But in our industry, I feel like it's good that kind of respect and trust is earned over time.
Yeah, I think it is one, having lived it for 20 years, we're not an industry that is quick to change, but it also is an industry that if you can build a partnership that people tend to stick with you, so there is some stickiness once you've built a real commercialized business. That's what I always say to my friends who are at least SaaS founders is commercializing the business, you will pull all your hair out. But once you get to a certain scale, there's something to be said about this industry too. It's kind of like you've raised almost or right at $500 million. You've made 14 acquisitions. You've done a lot of M&A. I ask this out of respect because you and I have had this conversation multiple times of we both have had our not great experiences with Oracle. There are some legacy tech folks in hotel and you wanted to disrupt that. At what point do you get so big though that then you're part of a bloated, forgive me if maybe some of my language is too strong, bloated legacy system, right? Like you're like the innovator disruptor. But once you get to a certain size, are you the disruptor still, or are you part of the ecosystem?
I have to be, right? Like, I feel like if I'm a 27-year-old kid, like looking at me, I'm like, God, that dinosaur, like he deserves to die.
Yeah.
So I feel like that is genuinely the thing that I go to sleep with every single night is like, how is somebody coming to kill us? How is somebody going to? And I actually kind of say I have this whole presentation at the beginning of every single new hire onboarding. I always try and talk about where are we going? What's the grander vision of Muse? Basically, how are we going to kind of change the world? But I always like to also stick with one part, which is basically like, what are some of the precepts that we should hold very, very dear? And I kind of go into like three fundamental ones, but one of them is, the industry that we serve is incredibly complex. Like you can have two 80-bedroom hotels on the same street, and they will have so many differences between them because they will fundamentally cater for two different types of people. You'll have the individual taste of the developer or of the person. You'll have the brand aspect, if it is branded. If it's unbranded, you'll have, a lot of the ways that independent hotelier has thought about how to kind of imprint their personality. And I think it's our job to be able to serve that complexity. So, really, really make sure that we don't force anyone to become lesser versions of themselves as a system, but at the same time we need to work with that complexity and simplify where we can. So that's how you become legacy, is that you don't take enough of a design thinking approach to how you approach the way that you build. And so if you keep on just adding without ever thinking about what are you going to cut away, that's how you become legacy in my view. I always kind of think about, Occam's razor. How can we make sure that this particular screen is, actually saying more, but having less on it? So, for example, how can we take away fields? How can we take away, even screens, basically? How can we make sure that something that you're doing in 3 steps, it's now taking you kind of 1.5 step? How can we kind of preload? How can we make sure that the system is much more contextual? And we have to think about that from a total kind of systems and a total company perspective. So
yeah, I agree. And if you look at companies that continue to be successful time and time again, they have a little bit of paranoia about them, always looking over their shoulder, right? Always testing the boundary. I mean, Netflix is a great example of, when they got out of the hard DVD business and we're going to go into streaming. I mean, I think the stock took a nosedive, and then now look today, they are a juggernaut, but 20 years ago they weren't. And I think that's a good example of you have to reinvent yourself if you're going to stay relevant.
Like I think that, one of the most interesting things that is going to, come to, for example, this industry is the way that AI will just accelerate a lot of these different things. It'll be interesting to see how distribution changes. I think it'll be interesting also to kind of see how the idea of loyalty really changes. Like when I look at, for example, most hotel brands, I'm like, there is no reason to have this many brands. Yeah, because fundamentally all of them have become mostly asset light. Is the thing that you're selling, is it the Marriott name or is it the Bonvoy name, for example?
It's definitely Bonvoy. I mean, if you look at all the brands, they are now just a loyalty play.
Exactly. And I think that that's the most important part. So like, why not call yourself Bonvoy for this type of stay? Why does it have to have the Courtyard name? It's just like, I get that it's a product that you're selling, but if that's the promise basically that you have to customers, then, and I think that for me is like a great example of something where it's just more to become more, and then hoping that that aspect basically doesn't get, disrupted. And it is difficult to disrupt, physical buildings.
Yeah, and I think you layer in how is AI going to change preferencing, and you look at the younger generation and that they're less brand centric and more experiential, unique. I think data and delivering unique experiences to the customer is going to be far more important than just a loyalty program
Yeah.
in the future. And so
Like,
you wonder, does that then hurt if the currency of Marriott and Hilton is Bonvoy and Hilton Honors, and if that currency doesn't have as much value in the future, what does that mean for that ecosystem, right?
I do think that'll be really interesting because, if you listen to Airbnb and if you listen to some of the pronouncements they've made, it's interesting because you see the same thing coming out of, for example, some of the credit card companies, that they're also trying to kind of make themselves into more experience-centric, brands, basically. And I think that, Amex has, to a certain extent, had this, but I do think that kind of era of extreme personalization will then seep into, well, what do your weekends look like, and then it'll be, what do your work week look like? What do your holidays look like? And it'll be much more about kind of being part of this type of network, I'd say, and almost like a credit network. I think makes a hell of a lot more sense, basically, than just, seeing it as kind of digital currency, as loyalty that you have today. So I think that will be like a really, really interesting development of this industry, as you will see more consolidation on the consumer side, and whether that's going to be some of the hyperscalers, and whether it will be like OpenAI with its kind of centralized identity, or it will be more the kind of the credit card side, basically, and things like that with like Capital One.
I want to talk about AI. I think I'm quoting you there. AI agents that autonomously manage pricing, staffing, and guest services. Now, I know you just did a piece at Skift, our good friend Rafat, and they said, hey, that assumes hotels will shift more operational decisions to algorithms, something that a company has yet to demonstrate at scale. Obviously, I would assume some of the 300 million you just raised is based off of developing these AI capabilities, not just simply being a PMS provider. What does the new world look like? If we fast forward a few years in the future, what is agentic hospitality? Like, what is the future going to look like?
I think that we take the starting point as, what does the consumer look like? Prospective guests that you have use some version of an agent to actually kind of plan your trips. There'll be still like a lot of consumer choice, basically, kind of in that. But I look at the thought experiment of what happens to the way that I operate my property. Let's say I've got a 100-bedroom property, and today I might get, on an average day, basically, like, let's say it's 2 to 5 requests. Somebody wants something special, somebody wants something, and those are not the automated ones where, you on booking.com, you can click your, want a high floor or something like that. But it's, somebody actually kind of writing in and saying, look, I'm allergic to these types of pillows. Now, if you have 30 or 40% of your travelers that have this natively in their phone, suddenly, whenever I need to type in, I as a human feel a bit bad about them, because I'm like, it's a bit annoying. Especially, I feel like, as men, we don't want to put in too many requests or something like that. But now you'll have 30% of your prospective customers will have agents that have zero shame, that only work to try and absolutely maximize the utility out of this one hotel. And they will ask the most shameless questions, basically. I feel like once they've experienced, something where they do get something very, very personalized, I always think about it as the kind of that Uber moment, when you first experienced going into an Uber and you didn't have to take out your credit card to give to the Uber driver. I think the question is, for the GMs, is like, well, what are you doing to actually kind of deal with that volume of requests? Because you could just ignore it. You could just say, fine, like, we're not that type of hotel. But if you do operate that kind of hotel where you do care about all of those things that I think we think are central to hospitality, guest experience, actually being able to have time with the guest, the way that consumers are going to want to experience this is that they'll start putting on huge pressure on you to be able to deliver this kind of personalization, and somebody else is going to be able to give it to them. And once that person has been able to give that, you're going to expect it at every single hotel. There's a very famous kind of Louis C.K. sketch about Wi-Fi on planes. But nowadays, like, if you don't have a Wi-Fi on a plane, like, you're angry about it. Yeah, and it's just like this beautiful, incredible thing that 5 years ago nobody was expecting, and now it's completely the baseline. Whenever I think about the future of hospitality, it's actually the explosion of the demands from the consumer. It's not necessarily the way that I think that it was put basically in that Skift article, which is, oh, we'll have receptions without people. I don't think that that's what people want. I actually think that they want someone who's going to be able to do all of that for them without the shame of having asked for it themselves.
Are you also thinking about like automation of workflows to make hotels more efficient? But you're also talking about a world where customer request and preferencing increases the volume of communication. So it's like the future world has more demands, you're solving for that. But in current world, if you have 100 employees at a hotel, this is a gross oversimplification, by the way, but do you envision a world that then it's 60 and not 100, or 40 and not 100? But then most of those jobs are more customer facing. So you get rid of the mundane stuff that, let's be honest, people don't want to do anyways. I mean, if you're a hotel general manager, you never envision yourself doing invoices in your office, right?
That's the point. This was why I started the company. I was looking at all these PMSs and I was like, these are great technology tools, but these guys have never worked in a hotel. Like, I've lived it. Like, I know how annoying it is to do these things. And there's so many idealistic young kids that go to hotel school because they love hospitality. And then you ask them to, spend 2 hours running like an end of day report, like the night audit. It's like, why? We create these like incredibly elaborate SOPs that are not guest enhancing in any way. They're just ways that the finance department or the operations department can kind of make sure that, these things are being done and they're kind of, actually worked. And I feel like that's where technology shines. Yeah.
In today's world, what percentage of work at a hotel do you think can be automated today?
I think of the back of house, probably 80%.
You're thinking like accounting, finance, guest fulfillment, communication stuff that...
Yeah. We famously kind of started out with the point of view that, the room and sending everything to room folios is wrong. You should be basically sending everything to guest profiles. And that's the main architectural change that we have versus every other PMS basically that's out there. The reason why we do it is because we just think that it's actually, you want to make sure that if that person comes back second, third time, you have that perfect customer record. If they've been to a place that you've recommended, you should have the feedback from that place on that same profile. If they've been to another brand property, you should have that piece of information. Catering to a guest is central to hospitality. And I think that this is why we feel really, really strongly that like everyone has the wrong architecture, because we talk about guest service in this industry as actually being kind of central, but none of our systems are based around that. They're based around certain accounting principles, basically, that we've kind of backed into. That doesn't scale. Yeah, because the time that you spend in a hotel room is maybe 12 hours, basically. It's never going to be 24 hours. And the business of hospitality is 24-hour people management.
Yeah. That's an interesting frame up of the architecture. If we're talking about like your roadmap as you build out this agentic hospitality layer, how are you thinking about prioritization? Because I can think of about 100 different workflows in a hotel that could be automated, right? What are you focused on first?
Most of these acquisitions are actually kind of bolt onto things that we're already kind of doing. There's just so much to be built in this industry. For example, with revenue management, we should get to a place where being able to work through strategy, but ultimately making sure that you can automate a lot of the decision making of when a specific type of product or when a specific type of kind of inventory is going to actually get a price change. And that's why we bought Automize, because the basics of revenue management we'd already had in the system, but to completely automate it and get the right algorithms to actually do that, Automize was just way, way better than us, basically. And I think it's exactly that. Like, what you want to kind of do is let the AI optimize all of those different workflows. It's the same thing, for example, with data chat. It's a way for us to kind of think about how do we actually ingest other fields and other forms of information that might be actually kind of in your BI, and how do you make sure that that's actually kind of informing your revenue management system on how to actually price up those rooms at exactly that time of day. The next is kind of infrastructure to make sure that all of these things can actually kind of work together, is the P&L of the hotel, or the P&L of the brand, basically. Like, if we cannot prove to you that you are more profitable with using our system, then fundamentally the technology is moot. Yeah, like, I can sell you a really nice PowerPoint of what my technology can do, but if I can't prove that you are 20% better off with my system than you are with a competitor, like, then we're not doing our job, and you are going to replace us. So I think that, like, those are the things that are really, really important for us. And, you know, as I say, it's a really, really complex industry. There are so many kind of different workflows.
How many hotels are you in today? I know
About 15,000.
If you want to operate or own branded hotels, particularly like Marriott, Hilton, they kind of force you through your franchise agreement to run their tech stack. How do you see the world where, you know, you're currently a PMS SaaS company, you're developing all these agentic capabilities? Do you think like some of the brands get away from in the future? You know, so if I'm a franchisee 5-10 years from now, I can elect to run Muse. Versus, because right now, if you're a branded hotel, you're kind of stuck with whatever their either proprietary system or their vendors are. In a lot of cases, it's not you, right?
Like, for me, that's just the nature of it. I think that they will still probably want to have some control over it. I just want to put us in the position where we're so good that you can't, with a clear conscience, basically deny Muse, because then you're just shooting yourself in the foot technologically. Like, that's basically how I started Muse. Like, at the beginning, I asked Apple if I could use their credentials to just log into every single, to the hotel that I was building. I was like, you know, and I got stuck on how do you provision credentials to non-Apple users? And Apple wouldn't let me provision new users on their behalf. And I was like, why? Like, this is great. Like, I can lead it in. I can give them basically an iPad that they've never used. And I think that that's where we have a really, really great position in Europe, where now we are, you know, approaching market leadership basically there. So, you know, the US is different because 80% of all hotels are branded.
Branded, yeah.
And so from that perspective, basically, like, you know, we're kind of playing around in that 20%. Whereas in Europe, it's completely the opposite. So in Europe, we have some of the largest hotel groups basically kind of running on us. In Europe, only 20% of the hotel stock is branded. I think that that's where we can kind of show off, I think, to anyone who is a franchisee or anyone who is kind of running in those hotels. And I think a lot of the times what does happen is basically like, that's how we're actually kind of now getting to those conversations with some of those different groups, because there might be an operator who has, you know, 5 of their properties running on Muse, and then 10 of their properties actually running on a different system, and we can show and we can prove to them that those other properties basically are just running more efficiently. That's what's powering it basically in Europe, and I think we see a similar effect basically in the US now, which is now actually our kind of highest growing region basically that we have.
Who do you see as your competitors?
Oracle. So they're the largest installer base. Like, if you look at it, basically, you know, it's a really fragmented industry. They have 9% of the total kind of share. That's basically like also why we do so much M&A and things like that, because a lot of places where we do have a very dominant position, we know from the customers that they're going to move to us. We do a lot of market research, and I think that in most places basically that we operate in, we have operated in for a while, people do see us as the most innovative system. But as a hotelier, you have other things, you have other priorities basically. You're rolling out a new messaging system, you're rolling out a new revenue management system. Like, there are things that you want to kind of do, and all of these tech replacements, most of the time, especially with some of the legacy vendors, like, they take so long to actually kind of do. Like, the PMS is the last thing that you want to change. If the proof is not in the pudding, basically, you'll put it off another kind of 10 years.
There's a lot of pain or perceived pain in that switching. Yeah. And so if I'm going to switch, I better have some real savings.
Yeah. You're either going to have real savings or real revenue uplift. So, like, I think that that's why, like, you know, people go like, oh, why did you require a revenue management system? Because revenue has always been part of what it is that we do. Yeah, like, The reason why we tried to automate the check-in experience wasn't because we wanted to have less people at the check-in. We wanted to give people who are working at the front desk, an extra 5 minutes to try and upsell. And that's why you do automation. You don't do automation just for its own sake. You do it because there's revenue at the end of it.
Makes sense. Cloudbeds announced Cloudbeds Collection. I haven't had a chance to talk to Adam or Rich about it, but do you ever see you guys going and having Muse collections, or do you see yourself ever getting into branding? We had this conversation about loyalty and branding. Do you ever see yourself having an adjacent business that is Muse hotels?
I think it's a terrible idea. Cloudbeds can do whatever they want. I feel like they also serve a slightly different part of the market that we do. And I think that it's a great company. I feel like they really try and punch above their weight, basically. But I think for that type of customer, there isn't anyone that's really kind of fighting for you. So if you're 25 rooms and below, you do probably need a more managed marketplace provider that's really, really looking at you. And I think that to a certain extent, Booking.com used to fulfill that function. Everyone's free to kind of run their business basically in whichever way that they would like. I think that ultimately, when I look at AI and when I look at credit card companies, whether it's the AI companies, all of those different things, if you want to grow, I feel like there's a bunch of companies that need to kind of say, what's the next thing or what's the new thing so that they can kind of keep themselves interesting. But I think from us, it's more about, how do we actually kind of do the fundamentals so that we really take a large swathe of the industry, just actually work on the fundamentals of the product, like how to make sure that your rooms are interesting, how to make sure that the actual service is interesting. It's the really, really boring bits of running a hotel, but those are the things that ultimately will get more and more rewarded in the age of AI.
Yeah. That's well said. I agree with that. I want to touch on leadership and then close this out. I've been dying to ask this question. I watch Eric Schmidt a lot, and in one of his speeches, he talks about that user interfaces probably go away. What is your take on that? I mean, is it eventually that you show up and you're at a front desk at a hotel and there's no terminal, it's just a person talking?
Yeah, I think if you look at our interface, I think a lot of the times we get praised for our design. But my point is that our central design principle at Muse has been user disengagement. It's a terrible phrase, but it's supposed to be the opposite of what happens on social media. A lot of designers fundamentally kind of get this wrong. I think about wanting to help the hospitality industry is that they go oh, we're just going to design it so that it's a little bit more like Facebook or something like that. And you're like, no, people should work with screens and with terminals the least amount of time in hospitality. If you're not looking at a screen, that means that you're now open to actually look into a customer's eyes. The idea of people being glued to their screens, this is also why I'm a huge fan of a lot of the new technology, because I want people to be kind of freed up. When we had our Series D announcement, one of the things that I had was an article that I published basically about, I do think that the age of AI does herald the rise of the real world again.
I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the fact that I think something that's really unique about you guys in particular is you and Matt have been working together since 2013. Matt's the CEO of Muse, and it's very rare to have a founder-CEO partnership in tech that spans the series A, B, C, D, 13 years into this together. How do you make that work? What you mostly see is one founder stays on and one leaves, or the founders are gone, you reach a certain size. How have you guys made it work?
I have no idea. We're very different people. We're both equally dominant in our kind of different ways. I think what helps us is that we're very self-aware. I know exactly all the, I might not, admit to it straight away, basically, but I know where I'm weak and where I'm terrible, and where Matt is an absolute genius and where he's fantastic. And it just so happens that I think that we overlap in a lot of different ways, but we're good enough in our respective places where we're really, really good that we can take a back seat to the other person. And so we've had quite a fluid relationship all through the years that we've worked together, where it's also very human. I think we leave a lot of space for one another. Basically, it's like if there's something that like Matt is really passionate about and he really kind of wants to run with, I really trust him to know what's best for Muse. And I think we have that kind of mutual respect, basically, and it just really works for us. And I don't know how to kind of recreate it.
Well, I think that's why it's so rare, right? I mean, that's why I asked about it. It's not common. So kudos to you guys for making it work. Well, I know I only have you for a few more minutes. You got to catch a flight to Berlin. ITB is this week. So I always like to close out with a little bit of rapid fire. No right or wrong answer. Feel free to be controversial. What's your favorite hotel in the world?
My actual favorite hotel in the world is the Hotel Coste in Paris. It's like an original Jacques Garcia hotel. It's just beautifully designed. Like the rooms are beautiful. It's not really a hotel. They still have static prices and everything like that. Very French, very old school. They make a ton of money through the restaurant, basically, and so like you can almost see that the hotel is like a real afterthought. But like in terms of experience, in terms of people watching, in terms of just like wanting to come somewhere to be like ensconced in a world that is not your own, that's probably the first one that I think about. And that like where I kind of think about like the old school ideals of hospitality, that you kind of go there and you're like transported into a different dimension and you're like, I'm now going to pretend I'm this person for the next 2 days.
Biggest trend that keeps you up at night?
I do think that like the whole AI vibe coding, in a few years it will be super easy to actually create your own PMS.
Right. So if all of a sudden what happens when there's a really smart hotelier that can vibe code Muse?
Yeah. And I think like actually that's always been the case. I remember recruiting the first other programmers. It's always been fairly easy to create a PMS. A PMS is basically not just a system that takes in reservations. It's also not a system that just does a check-in. I think that like what we're really doing is just responding to the natural growth of a lot of the technology, which is to basically say that hoteliers, they will vibe code unless you give them a much better experience.
I like that. Best career advice you've ever gotten?
I hate career advice. I think that like career advice is, I think it,
or maybe favorite saying then.
No, I feel like actually the best career advice, I think, is just to really, really try and know yourself. Our CPTO says always this one thing, which I think is very, very astute about me, which is that like I really have a hard time looking at people's weaknesses, but I really, really love their strengths. And if there are people who come with significant strengths, I always want them at Muse. I'm not too bothered about the rest, and maybe that's like terrible and kind of toxic, but like I really, really just want the best people with the best attributes that are better than anyone else.
I agree with that. I'm a tennis player. I think about like John Isner could have never been a pro tennis player if he hadn't had such an amazing serve.
Exactly. Like he's a perfect example of this. As long as you win those points, you're going to win matches.
I think we often focus on our negatives too much, focus on the strengths and lean into them. Will Muse be a publicly traded company in the next decade? Yes or no?
Decade? I know I'm supposed to be like really neutral about this basically, but yeah, why not? Yes.
Well, I saw you on NYSE, like oh, he's already prepping. No.
I feel like that's the thing. Like, at the end of the day, our trade is trust. The currency of that is going to be very highly regulated. And I think that being public is a really, really good kind of marker of that this is a company that you can trust, that has been vetted and verified.
Well, thank you for being here, my friend. It's amazing.
No, thank you.
Done. I end every show with the guest sharing what they're not done with. So, Richard, what are you not done with?
Making the hospitality industry better.
All right. You heard it here first. Well, safe travels to Berlin.
Thanks so much. And hope to see you soon.
Yeah, same.